I know when I get up, I'm like, wow, wonia, that's the breath of life. And it comes from a spoken universe, unspoken universe. And I drink mini, which is the voicing of life in relationship to all things water, right? And then I get up and I make a fire. The fire without end, it's always been there. Yeah, all these things. And then I step on with the earth and I'm like, oh, the elements, the compound, whoa, that's me. That's whoa, this is cool. And so that's the first recognition. And then you go outside and you're like, you could feel, in a sense, the intuition. What is that tree thinking about me? What does that tree see? So it's all about these other elements already inside of you, outside of you, that are already perceiving you. So where does your thoughts come from? Oh, they come from the tree, they come from the air, they come from the water, they come from the earth, they come from fire. Well, this is a great metabolism, not a miracle, but a great metabolism to understand that this is who we are. And why would we want to forget that?
My name is Olivia Clementine, and this is Love and Liberation Conversations exploring depth, wisdom, and relationship. Today, our guest is Tiokasin Ghosthorse. Tiokasin shares about using energy properly, the ultimate elder, and the forgotten language that truly matters.
Would you share about those who have or continue to be a guide for you? Any wisdom or stories that arise when they come to heart?
When we talk about, well, let's be honest, does that mean we've been lying the whole time? Okay, let's start with that. That expression doesn't exist in a lot of native languages. Let's be honest, because that means you were lying the other time until you say that. And then does that make you believable? So when I think about, okay, I don't see, um, how do I say it? But I experience, metabolize the elders, the ancestors. They go out before us to make room for us because they go first, and we must follow them. So, in line with where these elders come from, is they were when I was small, when I was little, when I was just a barely a toddler, and even on till I was six and a half. It was that ancestors' knowledge, not wisdom, knowledge that fed me, and I could only speak in the language of Lakota at that time, and that was a very much, I would say, not a primal, yet it was initiation into quantum physics language of understanding the metabolic energy that we all carry. And so, with that ancient relationship rather than connection, the elders who were born in the 1800s, I would sit in solace with. And I say that because it felt like that elder and myself were the only ones in the world. When you were a child, you're like, the world opened up when you were sitting next to an elder, because you could see the infinite, the infinite universe within yourself as a child. And when we I would sit with these elders who are not around, of course. All through my life, I've had different elders, and what they taught me, that the earth is the elder. What they taught me was the tree, which is the oldest. Do we say that in our way, is that the tree is the oldest living ancestor that we have, and before that was the rock, and the fire and all the elements. So I would say the elders are the elements that we are made up of, and to always respect that within and without, or as one, rather than this disjointed of connecting and inside outside. There's no such thing. There's no borders. So these ancestors are always present. You don't see them. We have lost the language connection in this society, in this language with relationship with the elders, and so we don't give that respect anymore. We've removed the spiritual value from the earth and gone into space somehow with that, and made a dominant figure that looks down from wherever, and it's almost like a child's story rather than an ancestor story.
Mm.
So I think that's the difference, and it's a long answer for your question, but that's what it is.
Would you elaborate on that last line of it's more of a child's story than an ancestor's story?
So when I say that, I'm referencing the fairy stories, the children's stories that we hear and we grew up with in this society that are read to us rather than experienced. So we wake up with concepts and we're told in concepts, and there's no freedom within to be in wonderment of our own. And I remember this very succinctly is until I was 6.5, I didn't have a mind. Everything was heart and intuition.
Mm.
And then I was taught what a mind was in this mental condition of of taking instruction rather than being shown. And so the showing process is you still are able to choose freely what you want to learn and what comes to you, what you're prepared for. But in another way of being different in a society that you have to teach and instruct and give instructions and directions and mechanically fall into place and linear thinking. And so this was very much different than the universal thinking, the holistic thinking, that everything had to have subject and name and title and objectified, and everything became a thing. And that was difficult for me to understand. And sometimes I still have misunderstandings with that because I'm always reverting, if I would say, my to my default thinking, my go-to thinking, which is Lakota, because that has gotten me this far. It wasn't because I had or I have a big account in the bank or a corporation backing me or anything like that. It was simply that from that time when I was young.
I'm curious what that looks like when you were young to be led by heart and intuition rather than mind.
A few years ago, I asked my mother, who's 88, will be 88 next month, and she said that, "Son, we cannot speak Lakota without intuition." And I kept thinking about that, and that helped me more in remembering the language that I was forced to forget, and am remembering again is the intuitive value is the elders speaking. We don't see them, but we feel them, like we know that an elder is a tree, and all life, all plants, all elements that I talk about, they speak through intuition. And what we do with this language we have that I'm speaking to you is to construct concepts, but we have to have precepts to do that. So we set up assumptions to think that we will ultimately know everything. And from that is like, where am I right? Am I wrong? And so we get into the egotistical values of what it means to be a human being, or in this case, a human. And we value human life over all other life, including those elders that we come from. And so we become anthropocentric and egotistical as a species in this way, and we're forgetting the relationship, and because we've been set up to assume that we're going to go someplace else after this lifetime. This consciousness here is that we say we're going to have higher consciousness, we're going to raise our consciousness, and we never get to deal with this responsibility here of caring for the earth, being with the earth, living with the earth, or at least learning how to live with the earth. And so the subjective language tends to materialize everything and takes the energy out. So if I say these are glasses, right? And that's English. But if I say these are glassing, that's in a thought of Lakota in a small way. That's what they're doing. They're created to be energy. and that's what we identify, or basically that's what we feel they are. So in these ways, which are very ambiguous to a lot of people in this language that we're speaking, is like, oh, he's not making sense, and that not making sense is actually the mystery that's always involved in what we're saying, what we're thinking, what we're being, and what we should be living is always acknowledging the mystery, which is intuition. Yeah.
You said someplace, if nature is blocked, then a spiritual maturity never happens. That the highest intelligence is to be one with Mother Earth. Certainly, this feels very connected with what you're sharing, and what you're sharing about this desire to always transcend. Like, we're in such a culture of transcending, being in the intellect, the feelings, intuition, body are less than intellect. That intellect equates to money, power, fulfillment. And it's just so interesting to me because it's like on an intellectual level, even so many people understand the emptiness of of intellect, money, power, fame.
Mm.
And yet, why is it that we still want to forget our original home? Forgetting completely the only way we can actually even be here, function,
Y-
breathe, connect.
Yeah, totally. I think that that's a great question and thought process there, is that I think in the Western sense of forgetting the roots and stuff, of course, the tragedy that has happened to the peoples who have come here. And we are still here as Native people on the land that we were created from, with the land. And when I think about the pain, looking for the pain relief, forgetting helps that for temporary reasons. That we came here to fulfill a dream called America, and without ever remembering the Native peoples are that dream, right? To show people how to live with the earth. I think that's the ultimate dream. But when you come here bringing constructed ideologies like democracy, like communism, like anything that comes here with the old world thinking that comes out of Greece and Roman concepts, those ideas of how it is to be free. So therefore, we're given the ideals, the amendments of how to be free, the civil rights about how to be free, and they're human. And so when we got disconnected, it's we forgot about the earth defining us as humanity. The earth, nature defines what humanity is. And we've got into an egotistical elitism with the earth, away from it, distancing ourselves, saying that we're more than the earth, therefore we can dominate the earth, and we're going to go someplace else. And what I'm saying is, Olivia, is that when we've defined ourselves as what's humane, is that the cat, or is that the bug we squish, or is that something we don't see over there, the Native people who are trying so and struggling so hard to maintain a sustainability of 100,000 years of culture.
Mm.
And now we're idolizing or worshiping barely 5 to 6,000 year old cultures coming out of those places like Samaria or other whatever. And those thoughts are childlike somehow, because they're based on nouns, thingifying, material gain, and therefore our intellect is from that. So I would say that understanding how not to think, you truly know where thinking comes from, the intelligence of the heart. That's the intuition of the heart. And so it's a very different way of being, and it's not a trendy way. And that's what we run into in modern day society. A trendy way to describe, how do you say, hospicing this modernity, you know? So we are trying to relieve our pain by forgetting, what we done to the land, what we're doing to the land, what we're doing to the Native people, what we're doing to ourselves. By It's easy, we're looking for the convenience, the bodega on the corner, to get this pain relief roll on or whatever it is. And I think the terms are so trendy that it's like we try to make up new psychologies for the pain all the time, and that who's that based on? Oh, maybe a couple of white men in the 1800s, Freud and whoever else. So that's what we're basing our modern day. Let's get well quickly. Find it in the book. Go to this retreat, and we'll be okay temporarily. But we find ourselves wanting more, and so it's not. It's so self-centered that the center has become empty now. And this may be harsh words because why hold any punches? Why beat around the bush anymore? And I think it's required that we tell the truth, not just try to do our best in telling the truth, but we must. The earth is requiring us to tell the truth now. Yeah.
It brings to mind the topic of vulnerability and talking about trends. There's such this interesting trend of as if vulnerability just came about like this. It's so important to be vulnerable with each other. And yet we forget this vulnerability with the earth, which is what it sounds like you're speaking of too, like this exposing ourself, that brokenness, that tenderness to the earth seems so important right now.
Yeah, that it is. And how do I say this? Shika, we are very pitiful and we don't understand, and we become numb with our own tragedies like trauma. And I know that's the newest, one of the newer things. And we only make it, it's like Americanizing yoga when the yogas are not stretching themselves and distorting themselves. The yogi are sitting in one place being yogis,
Mhm.
practicing yoga. So there's a disconnect from that originality. And earlier you asked, and that's the pain, the separating from the earth, our spiritual umbilical cord, is we separated from the earth, and now we don't know how to find mother anymore. So we kind of shun her every time she reminds us that you belong to me, if that's an ownership mentality. But it's really, we do, because that's what we're made up of. We're made up of the stars too. And so that's too big for a dualistic mind. It's too big for cause and effect. That's too big for concept of time, beginning and ending. That's too big for hierarchical thinking, the top and the bottom. It's a box. It's a pair of box, I call it. I think that's where we have to understand that there are other languages that can't fit within the language we're speaking now.
Mm.
And this is why we are compartmentalized as Native people, put on reservations. We're all out of mind, out of sight. These little blocks of land on the whole continent with Native people, so that we're not really involved in this so-called American society or culture at best. I think now the young people like yourself are starting to sense something else is going on. Like there's no need for a new narrative, because the narrative is Earth, but our intellect will listen to all the well-educated Western white males and women who speak of these concepts so that we could feel better about ourselves. Then that requires more writing, more books. We don't see, oh, we're cutting this tree down to make all these books. And I think I'd share this story right now, that you have these Native people sitting there, and the creator is talking to us, right? We're talking to us along this river, and this beauty in her. And then we look and we see a ship coming, and we look at it, and they get out and they chop all the trees down, and they build it, a building in the middle of all the trees being devastated. And all the people go in, and then they say they talk to God, right? And we're wondering, right, God is, the creator is talking to us, but they are talking to God, but they've chopped God down. So
Mm.
there's that disconnect from nature that came here.
Yeah.
And that's what the young people, I think, are willing to, not as an alternative, but as a native way of being before Western thinking supposedly evolved everybody. But it's part of the evolutionary process, right? And it's not like getting better and leaving things worse. That's not a process. That's not evolutionary. Neither is it leaving the earth. Evolutionary is understanding that the earth has known what we need all the time and answered every prayer, every want, that we wanted, that we asked for as humans, gives us air, and we take that for granted, gives us food, we take that for granted, take water, we take all of this life that's been given freely, and then we package it, then we give it to each other saying, okay, this is why this society doesn't know what being free is or freedom. It gives it to you, civil liberties, right? And in the truest sense, there is no word for free in our language because that's what we are.
Mm.
So it's always that we are wild, and I accept that. I'm not going to be, giving things out in a very restrictive, dualistic language and say, here's the answer, right or wrong, good or evil. It's impossible for us to think that, be that in many native nations.
Mm.
Yeah.
I've heard you actually in many interviews say, like, you speak in circles, not in lines or something. And I don't function as well in lines, but I think so many of us have, we're taught that we're not intelligent if we can't answer a question just in this particular way, in this particular form. And you gave me a lot of permission, just you constantly mentioning that when you've been doing discourse with people and just holding that space, allowing yourself to go in the way that you wander. I think
Yeah, it's no agenda, no
yeah.
agenda. The example is during the onset of this intelligent being called COVID. I was instructed by these elders to hold 33 fires in a row, week after week. So I began in March of that 2020 and ended at sometime in early November. I started by myself, and then friend joined, and another friend, and then at the end there were about 40 of us, and the no agenda was so foreign to those people who are trying to find a healing formula, and they were wondering, well, what's a fire about? And like, "It's not about anything." And they couldn't get it because it wasn't structured, it wasn't conceived, it wasn't something they could take back and put on a refrigerator and get approval for meritorious valor or whatever that is called. And so, like, no, the fire called. The elder of the elders said, this is how it's going to be. I'm going to give you intelligence. And out of that, from what I understand, is there are 33, the elders said, there are 33 intelligences that the humans, not human beings, the humans have forgotten that they were once human beings, that made them human beings. So 33 intelligences that were missing about how to live with the earth, right? And so that's what, and I don't have the list because that's a no agenda list. I think just the energy of that, I think we come to understand, like, wait, now there is an intelligence within what's been given us to wake up and really start living with the earth, and appreciating the fact that we are here, and we're supposed to be here as free people, and all that means is responsibility, responsibility for the earth, responsibility for all life. And the technology that we've had, humans invented that. Humans invented technology. And I was asked the other day about, well, you can use technology in a good way and a bad way. And they wanted to have one over me, I guess I would say that, well, you use tobacco. You can use it in a good way or a bad way. I said, well, as far as we're concerned, until the Westerners came here, we've always used tobacco in a good way because we understood the balance of that. We never put it in our lungs, and all that. We've always used it in an appreciation, and we knew the intrinsic energy value to earth and why that particular herb came to us. And I said, well, you you come from a place that technology was invented, and look how much you hold that up. And they rationalize it from then on. And I said, well, the difference is that humans did not invent tobacco. So it showed us a way to live with them, and appreciate the value of other beings already here before we as a species, young species, came here. that we are in fact the most ignorant of all the species here.
Mm.
So I think the humbleness, the vulnerability you're talking about, I think it's haughty in a sense. I think it's another way to describe that we don't want to be hurt anymore. So I'll take this next subscription of a retreat and that pill or whatever in the society, or go to that ceremony, ayahuasca, or whatever these things are going on. And so these, and in the native way, it's like, wait, just one person takes it for all of them because that person knows how to use it in a good way. And that's not a medicine person or what, but that elder who who's able to take that medicine is able to understand these other worlds and find what that person who's ailing needs, this plant or that plant, and that's how it's done. But here in America, you we've yoganized, that's a word, we've Americanized ayahuasca. We made it available to everybody. Only the rich can have it shipped in. It's all these privileges to think that we're all medicine people, right? And it all going up to the egotistical mindset. And I think it's part of the torture we do to ourselves. I think it's Latin. It says "fellow de se," meaning to commit a crime against self. We're committing suicide. In this way, we're not even understanding our addictions, right? Or because of a wanton loss inside. We're trying to feel something by accumulating, and the privilege of being able to buy, and going back to the formula. So, the difference is that we have stopped making decisions through the earth and continue to make them through the bank. We don't know what we're doing to ourselves because we're in the greed of it. We're in the taking too much of it, the washichu. We're taking too much of everything, even thinking information. It information glut. It's a greed. I have to know. I gotta know. I gotta know. But yet people begin to know, and then that information changes, right? But the earth and the sun and truth always rise, as my elder would say. Those three things rise in any human's life: is the sun, the moon, and truth. Those things always rise. And right now, that the sun has been being truthful, faithful, if that's the word, and so is the moon. And now truth is rising again. And that's what we have to look forward to. Yeah.
Mm.
So there you go, the circular thinking.
I
Yeah.
love it so much. There's
Mm.
so much in there too that it's really touching. And you just speaking of the fires and people wanting to know what the purpose of those fires is really striking to me. This sense of time, the relationship we have with time in the modern world, this like, well, what am I getting from my time? And even in
Mhm.
ceremony, what am I going to get? And I'm curious, from a Lakota perspective, how is time related with like the beginnings and endings, or I'm curious your perspective on time.
Well, I've been told that, originally there was no need for time. And so we had to adapt, or yeah, adapt to the concept of what time is. And you hear from that Western perspective, the colonized perspective, well, how did you count the seasons? Why did you keep history, winter count and all these things? Is because we had the influence of the Westerners
Mm.
conceiving what time was according to labor, and so in the continuum, if you're a universal thought processor and your calendar, so to speak, is the Pleiadian calendar, um, not a Julian or a Gregorian or even a Jewish calendar. Any of these calendars that perceive time as concepts of control. And when you come from the universal way, then how big is your heart rather than your mind? Because your mind conceives of time, concepts, and inventions to get whatever we need to get through this dimension. Um, so the time really didn't exist. We always say time immemorial. And we say, how long have we been living here with the earth? And we say time memorial. You don't remember that because time didn't exist. We're in a continuum, always going not just in the future or the past, but always being here, but never being here. So
Mm.
these are all time concepts. Oh, the future, the past, and now. And so we must always think in a Western way of saying, well, the past and the future and now. So Akantu basically means that the being from the ancient future now. But if you're on a continuum, there's no need for time because if I could say it's eternity, then that's what it is. Yeah. And so we'd rather recognize at what point we are on that and seeing and acknowledging the energy within us as well as what's going on in the universe. So these are could be way out there thinking because they're outside the box and people are like, oh, we don't want to believe that. We have to write this down to we want to present this to a class. We want to, it's always trying to take all of that beautiful knowledge and ancient wisdom and put it into, something that we can a container, right? And all this time the container never existed in the first place. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. When you're walking through the world from the perception that you have, how do you perceive the self? Like, who is the one that's perceiving when you are in life?
I know when I get up, I'm like, wow, Wonia, that's the breath of life. And it comes from a spoken universe, unspoken universe. And I drink Mini, which is the voicing of life in relationship to all things water, right? And then I get up and I make a fire. The fire without end, it's always been there. Yeah, all these things. And then I step on with the earth and I'm like, oh, the elements, the compound, whoa, that's me. That's whoa, this is cool. And so that's the first recognition. And then you go outside and you're like, you could feel, in a sense, the intuition. What is that tree thinking about me? What does that tree see? So it's all about these other elements already inside of you, outside of you, that are already perceiving you. So where does your thoughts come from? Oh, they come from the tree, they come from the air, they come from the water, they come from the earth, they come from fire. Well, this is a great metabolism, not a miracle, but a great metabolism to understand that this is who we are. And why would we want to forget that? Why do we say it's a prayer? Because that's a container? No, I mean, think about no religion and like intuition could be that. And I go outside almost every time this either an eagle or a hawk appear. And I'm like, saying hello. This is good timing. I can say all these things like that. And it's just like, oh yeah, Chetan, Wambly. And I recognize, even when I'm driving in the car and there's a hawk sitting on the telephone wire and everybody cars are just going by, I slow down and I honk and I acknowledge you. And that hawk just looks right at me because it feels that energy. Things like this, the little we can give to the earth is it lessens the pain of taking. I guess humans, I don't think we know how to give anymore. We as Lakota, an elder said that we've given everything as Native people, and not to make people feel guilty or anything like that. We've get and everything's been taken from us. But one thing that we don't have anything more to give. That's when we truly know how to give. Is when we don't have anything to give because it's all been taken. So I learned about wow, that's what we are in the ultimate is the energy that can't be given, can't be taken by concepts, control, guns, drugs, behavior, addictive behavior, anybody who thinks they can dominate. And that's the other thing is that the word for domination or the concept of it doesn't exist in Lakota. Yeah.
As you're sharing about your relationship in the morning, the the breath of life, the fire, the earth, the air. Would you mind sharing just even more about each of those elements and your experience with them and anything that arises in relationship to each?
Each of those elements has a creation story, so to speak. And if we, because I'm speaking this language, that means, well, when it begins, when did it begin? But I can only use this language in a sort of broader way. The context of creation is that every moment is innocent. And what makes us innocent
Mm,
without guilt is that energy is always present. Energy is always innocent. It's what we do with it. And and what did we do with water? What did we do with the elements that I described? What do we do with that? Do we have we lost respect and paid attention to Western environmentalists and said that recycling is an answer or alternative energy is the answer, renewable sustainability and all these are concepts like this is how we look at the water. This is how we look at ourselves. We're disconnected, so we want to describe things in temporary pain relief without ever understanding, like climate change, right? We climate crisis, climate warming in the 90s when I was younger, and all these things that were being said then. I'm like, wait, but the elders are saying it's grief. It's always been grief. And how to speak that language of grief is lacking
mm,
because it's very selfish. It's a concept. So when I'm thinking about okay, these what's been faithful are the elements, and they want us to recognize the grief that maybe they're pain because they can't come as pure as they did before because of what we're doing with our thoughts.
mm,
And I think the creation story of each of those elements are actually the creation story of us. We've taken over creating and using what little imagination that is. We've lost a proper use of energy, the proper tools of relating with the earth and or even ourselves and other human beings. And we've come up with the easy answers of walls and wars and property, especially, and ownership and self-centered I and me and my and mine and ours. We've come up with that, and because it's easier to speak a language that is disconnected to the earth, because that means we have to be responsible to the earth. So we come from the earth, that we as native people can't go to the heart because that's where we come from. And so in the Western world, you say, well, you have to go to the heart, get centered in the heart. And I'm like, wait, no, it's the other way around. We come from the heart and we go to the mind. It's always the center here, the Lakota. Yeah, it's always about coming from the heart, the Chante, the tree of life, the tree of truth, and all these the concepts, elemental intelligences that are centered into intuition right there. So it's like I can go into a meditative state with other people and I hear them thinking. I'm like, wow, that's noisy. You guys are all noisy, man. Let's not think. Leave the mind and actually understand a childlike manner, innocence from the heart, and stop with the concepts, stop with owning, stop with information. Just stop thinking. Let the heart do that. Let the earth save you rather than you thinking you can arrogantly dominate and save the earth. Because she knows she's been here for who knows how much longer do we have as a native people, as people understanding the native? It's familiar, but generations, I'd say maybe 200 generations that the Westerner has been away from themselves. And that came here. And I'm maybe one generation away from that. And so I'm going to default to a 100,000-year-old culture. That's the one that came here 500 years ago. Yeah.
mm. And just speaking of expression, you're certainly someone that is able to express in so many different ways. Like you're a musician and play the Lakota flute, and you have a radio station that's a conduit for Indigenous voices, and just your general understanding of language feels very well understood in terms of even just the Western language and the roots of that, and then certainly the Lakota language. And you've also been through severe traumatic experiences in terms of the reign of terror and missionary schools where your mother tongue was literally tried to be removed from you fully. What has happened in your expression through that time, the journey of this expression, this Lakota?
I was nice. I thank you. Thank you. It reminds me of the people that have helped me and recognize where I was in my lifetime. And that journey started with them. And the first time I was described to who I was is when I was about four. My father had left. He journeyed on, and I didn't know what it meant at that time to not have a father. Right. So I spent some times down in a creek bed with so sort of a enclave of walls of a creek, maybe 20 feet high around me, and then the creek itself, and a little sandbar, so to speak. And I sat there and just sat there and was watching the reflection of the birds, magpies and woodpeckers, and just playing in the reflection in the trees above. And I was like so wondering about there's another world. I look up and there's another world. I was always in that phase. Maybe that was my transition to accept my father was gone, and I didn't know. Maybe that was the impact. But I was sitting there, and I heard crunching, and behind me, around the creek bend, it came an older man, and his shirt was all ragged. He had like leggings on of a native person with moccasins, so all was worn. He was worn and torn, basically, and he had lines, deep lines in his face. And I watched him, and I wasn't afraid of him. He came up and he looked at me, and he bent down and grabbed the sand, and he took it and he scattered across the reflection of the pool. And he said, "This is who you are." And at 4 years old, you're into like the circles that are hitting the water, and all these circles appearing. And I'm like, this is who I am. And I saw the stars in that way. And this is 4 years old. And then in an instant, I looked up and I didn't see him go. And so that defined me to understand that no matter who it is along the way, I will be, if I refer to the elders that are showing me the way, such as the earth, first of all, in this case, human elders, I could also take reference from them. And along the way, my father would come through them because the recognition was in me also that I was my father, and never leaving that alone. And I think the trauma, not the drama of it, but the trauma is that you can't make that up. Because if you make up trauma, it's going to hurt those who actually are having. So when I thought about it, oh, from that point on, I had trouble trying to adjust into the society with what they were telling me what trauma was all about. And yet we have a ceremony called wiping the tears that I didn't get to go through until I was in my 30s. But those times of trauma at that time were were often described to me from the society. But yet, why did all these events in my life, these elders come forward? Was to fill me in, to help me to get to this point of the wiping the tears ceremony and understanding that I was being prepared for this time. I was being prepared by the elders who are out ahead of me and coaxing me on. So earlier in this little discussion, a doctor from Pakistan. Majid, I think his name was, he in New York City saw me and he said, "Do you know what I love about you, Tiokasin?" And of course, I'm saying, "What?" And he said, "That you never give up. You never give up. The voice is not just your own." And he recognized that. And being a Pakistan, yeah, from Pakistan, he understood the struggle that they are going on over there with religion impending and dominating, and the real people just wanting to be free to live with the earth.
Mm.
Because what we get is the fringe layer on top of what news is all about. But we never hear about the people in the jungle, in the desert, in the mountains, struggling to live with the earth. And I think that's been my mainstay all this time, Olivia, is really struggling to live with the earth, which I said before is like the highest intelligence. And if that's a way to think about it. So I think that's what has helped me go through all this trauma, not to make it up, because a lot of people want to make it up so that they can have attention. Um, yeah.
There's a part of me that wants to know how to grieve in a way that's honest.
Well, Goodway is another elder of mine currently said that of course, speaking a different language helps. But how do I say it? Is he said something like that if you want to see the results of your work during this lifetime, then you will never be worth the people that you come from. Because if you don't have struggle, right, you're never going to know who you are. And if you're just going to come from this worry wart up here, that's not what that's for, right? And if you give what you're taking from the earth rather than as a given reward, it's like, no, just give to the earth because you're doing it for the 7 generations ahead, right? But you have to understand also, Olivia, that you are the seventh generation. And each generation is the seventh generation,
Mm.
you see, not just some place to go have a goal, or how do you say it, a goal and solution.
Mm.
Uh, we've gone far away from being ourselves by accepting a goal, and we must achieve. We must have a goal. We must have a solution, and that's the cause and effect mindset duality of the West, and forgotten about how to think multidimensional
Mm.
with the Earth in the quantum physics way, and so we don't have the language. We only have noun fulfilling, which really isn't about filling anything. It's just temporarily taking space until it's gone and the next trend comes. And yeah, it sounds all critical that I'm saying, but like before, I was just being me and no one liked what I was saying. But I'm sure certainly not going to be a performance native, performance Indian, sing to anybody, a ceremony song or pray for anybody. It's not that way anymore. It's with the earth. What are we doing for the earth? You know, and it's difficult, especially for Native people, to try to be ourselves because we don't have the freeness of land, and so we are materially poor. And I understand it as we've made poverty for Indigenous peoples. When they weren't poor, they didn't understand what poverty was, nor rich, because they didn't need to be rich. They had the earth. They have the earth. And now we're doing the same thing to the wildlife, the animals. We're making them poor.
Mm.
They are disappearing, just like Indigenous peoples are disappearing. And I think about the world without Indigenous peoples, without animals, and all we have is technology,
Mm.
and that's not going to last very long. So I think, some people say, well, Tiokasin, don't you think we're romanticizing Indigenous peoples? And I say, well, you're coming from a different point of view. And I say to that, well, if you think we're romanticizing Indigenous peoples, then what's the alternative? Do we continue romanticizing Western ideals? And it's like, okay, is there an answer? No agenda. follow the earth in a way. That's the only way we can do that. So in a traditional way that I was brought up in this good way without having to speak the language so much, but in and out of that trauma, I've learned that it, it's it's really not that good to be a follower. It's not that good to be a leader. It's always comforting comforting to be with.
Mm.
So neither a leader, a follower, but to walk with, be with in that context. So in a way, the age difference disappears and the energy is never aging. It's always ageless. So when I talk about innocence, that's what I'm talking about. That we all, maybe this body is slowing down and ready to go to someplace else. But so who's not? You know, when people say, well, you're only young once, Tiokasin, I said, yeah, and you're only old once too, you know? So why are we so youth driven? You know, it's like because we forgot the elders, you know? It's all about looking good and beautiful because when you're young, you can't be that, you can be cute, but when you're old, like, yeah, the image is not there anymore. We don't see the inside anymore. What we've forgotten, the ama, memory, I guess I'd say, but it's the acknowledgement of the relationship,
Mm.
like in Midako Oyasi, like in Mini, the voicing of the living relationship between you and I and all things. That's constantly ongoing.
Mm.
We forgot that, but we really didn't. We just have to acknowledge that memory, right? And then the memory becomes instant. So it's about now. What are you doing now? What are we exchanging energy with them? Without being new agey about it. I'm not going to refer to a crystal or a book or even another human being. I'm like, the earth is always telling me, always like, whoa, you know, when I really get down to it, I'm able to take the concepts out of my head and stop making it all about me. Then it's like, wow, the whole world opens up and the
Mm.
whole universe opens up. And it's like, you know, this education of the West is just tried to take the wisdom out of me. Give me information and you learn by rote and linear and dictionary and cycle. And this is the way you learn because it gives you a slot within the system and access to the privilege of attaining more money or something like that. This other way is like, okay, how tiny is the earth? And we don't even know what humility or humbleness is all about anymore because we're told for centuries now that we are better than the earth.
Mm.
And this is why we're getting sick. We're not acknowledging the intelligences that are coming. Tell us like, pay attention. Let's do this again. Instead, we're fighting it, considering it the enemy. And that's for stupid people. It's like always acknowledge, in this case, the good and the bad, but it's acknowledge that there is something more intelligent than we are, and they're using their intelligence in a good way, in a proper way. And we are just still learning that, and we have to relearn that fast. You know, a crash course, as you would might think, but we have to do that now because I'm not a gloom and doom, but I am optimistic about that something has to happen and will anyway. Um, and those who are still in relationship with the earth will always not talk in connection language. Yeah.
Mm. As we close our conversation, make our way towards that, would you share what your thoughts are on using energy wisely?
Yeah. Let's go with the word magi. Imagination. You know, imagination. We can go, I'm a magic nation, I guess, for tongue-in-cheek thought process. Stop using adjustable philosophies or adaptable or chit-chat philosophy. Stop using adaptable prophecy. You know, we can't ever do that. The earth is always going to lead that. So when I'm thinking about energy, is that look at the earth, for example, is the bird. A bird is using the energy of the earth properly. The wind, the air, right? The tree is using all the energy in a proper way and giving, always cycling, recycling, always giving in that way, metabolizing this all. So I think it's in recognition of the words, the language we're using, because language is an energy. You're using it either properly or improperly. And if we're going to stay within this material thought process, then I think that's the end of those peoples who are constantly distancing themselves and and I consider this language a bypass language because it's intellectual and it's based on, again, 5,000 years of 16 years ago, 66,000 years of 6,000 years of Western thought processing. And I do, well, it's feeling that the language is the key. And I've always said this because we use it the first thing that we come from when we come into this dimension from our mother's womb. So it's the first language we use, right? And then always reminded of something heard years ago. That language, the first weapon drawn in conflict is language, and we haven't learned how to use that properly. And I think that that would be one of the keys to learn how to be non-agenda without how-to instructions. So maybe we just have to stop asking how to do something because that's still instruction. And tell me how to do something so I can get it quickly. Right. So maybe just hearing it and then wow. So go to the earth and observe how she listens to us, not how, well, I'm going to go to the earth and I'm going to listen to the tree and I'm going to listen to the birds and the wind. Like, we don't even understand that language. So who are we think that we can make a park out of it? Let's go to the earth, go to the center and learn how she is listening to us. She listens to everything, in balance. She gives us the air, the water, the food, yeah, all the senses. But then first and foremost, she gives us intuition. Not listening to our intuition, is listening to her intuition about how she feels about us. What does she think about us? What are we doing for the earth? How much time are we giving to her? You see, so that would be another way of using energy properly.
If you enjoyed this conversation with Tiokasin Ghosthorse, you may also enjoy another conversation with the renowned Bhutanese author Kunzang Chodin. A descendant of the spiritual wisdom holder Pema Lingpa, Kunzang shares what it means to live on sacred land and how a childhood in the simplicity of a close-knit mountain community shaped one of Bhutan's most celebrated writers. You can find this episode linked in the show notes.